The dust clung to Penelope Richardson's black dress like a second skin, and she wondered if the people of Globe, Arizona, believed even the earth itself conspired to mark her as different. She had arrived in town 3 months ago, stepping off the stagecoach with nothing but a worn carpetbag and the weight of 3 dead husbands behind her. The whispers started before her boots touched the ground. By sundown, the entire town had decided she was cursed, a beautiful poison that killed any man foolish enough to love her. It was 1883, and Globe was a silver mining town where superstition ran as deep as the ore veins in the surrounding mountains. Penelope kept her head high as she walked down Broad Street toward the general store, ignoring the way mothers pulled their children closer and men averted their eyes. She was 23 years old, and she had learned that grief wore many faces. Hers happened to be striking, with auburn hair that caught fire in the Arizona sun and green eyes that reminded people of deep water. Beauty, she had discovered, could be as much a curse as any hex when combined with misfortune. The first husband had been a childhood sweetheart in Missouri, dead of consumption 6 months after their wedding. The second, a ranch hand in Texas, kicked in the head by a horse during their first year together. The third, a prospector who had promised her a new start in Arizona, caught a fever on the trail west and never recovered. Each death had been witnessed, documented, entirely natural. But 3 dead husbands before a woman turned 23 was the kind of coincidence that turned into legend in a place like Globe. She pushed open the door to Morrison's general store, and the conversation inside died like a snuffed candle. Mrs. Morrison stood behind the counter, her mouth pursed in disapproval. 2 miners browsing the tool section suddenly found the hammers fascinating. A young woman clutching her husband's arm actually gasped. "I need flour, sugar, and coffee," Penelope said quietly, setting her coins on the counter. Mrs. Morrison took her time counting the money, as if the coins themselves might be tainted. She gathered the items without a word and practically threw them into a crate. Penelope gathered her purchases and turned to leave. "It's a shame, Mrs. Morrison said loudly, addressing the room rather than Penelope directly. "Some women just don't seem to understand when they're not wanted, bringing their curse into a decent town, putting good men at risk." Penelope's fingers tightened on the crate, but she kept walking. She had learned that defending herself only made things worse. The bell above the door chimed behind her like a judge's gavel. The boarding house where she rented a room was at the edge of town, a deliberate placement by Mrs. Chen, the Chinese widow who owned it. Mrs. Chen had her own reasons for understanding what it meant to be unwanted. She was sitting on the porch when Penelope returned, smoking a thin pipe and watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. "They bother you again?" Mrs. Chen asked in her precise English. "Same as always." Penelope set the crate down and sank into the chair beside her landlady. "I don't know why I stay." "Because running didn't work the first 3 times, Mrs. Chen said bluntly. "Maybe the curse is believing you are cursed." Penelope had no answer to that. She watched the sun sink lower, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. It was a lonely sound that echoed through her chest. The next morning, the sound of hammering woke her before dawn. Penelope dressed quickly and went to the window. A man was repairing Mrs. Chen's fence, working with the methodical precision of someone who knew his craft. Even from the second floor, she could see he was tall, built like someone who had spent his life doing hard work under an unforgiving sun. "Who is that?" Penelope asked Mrs. Chen over breakfast. "New man. Calls himself Wade Rivers. Cowboy looking for work. I hire him to fix things." Mrs. Chen sipped her tea. He asks about the empty barn. I tell him he can stay there if he fixes the roof first. Penelope watched through the kitchen window as Wade lifted a beam into place. He moved with an easy confidence, brown hair curling at his collar beneath his hat. Something about the set of his shoulders reminded her of her first husband, before the sickness took the strength from his bones. She shook the memory away and focused on her breakfast. She had sworn after burying Thomas on the desert trail that she would never marry again. The town thought her cursed, but Penelope knew the truth was simpler and somehow worse. She was just unlucky, and anyone who got close to her paid the price. The morning passed with Penelope doing laundry and mending. She had taken in sewing work from some of the Mexican families on the south side of town. They didn't seem to fear her curse as much as the white townspeople did, though they were careful never to let their sons linger when they dropped off or picked up their clothes. Around noon, someone knocked on her door. Penelope opened it to find Wade Rivers standing there, hat in hand, sweat dampening his collar. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 27 or 28, with gray eyes that held an unexpected kindness. "Madam," he said, his voice a low rumble with the hint of a Texas drawl. "Mrs. Chen said you might have some water to spare. The pump's running slow." "Of course." Penelope stepped back. "Come in." He hesitated in the doorway, and she realized he was being careful of propriety, not wanting to compromise her reputation by entering her room. It was almost laughable given what the town already thought of her. "It's all right," she said. "Half the town thinks I'm a witch anyway. A cowboy in my doorway isn't going to make much difference." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of someone else who had been judged unfairly. He stepped inside, careful to leave the door open behind him. Penelope poured water from her pitcher into a tin cup. Their fingers brushed when he took it, and she felt a jolt that had nothing to do with static or superstition. He drank deeply, then met her eyes. "Thank you, Miss Richardson, Penelope Richardson." His expression didn't change. No shock, no sudden step backward, no sign that he had heard the stories. Either he was new enough that the gossip hadn't reached him yet, or he was a better actor than most. "Wade Rivers," he said, offering his hand. She shook it, surprised by the gesture. Most men in Globe wouldn't touch her if she were on fire and they were holding a bucket of water. "You're new to town," she said. "Got in 3 days ago, been working odd jobs trying to get a sense of the place." He glanced out the window at the mountains. "It's beautiful country. With an ugly heart sometimes." He looked at her then, really looked at her, in a way that made her feel seen rather than examined. "That's true most places, I've found, but there's usually some good mixed in with the bad if you know where to look." Before Penelope could respond, Mrs. Chen's voice called from downstairs. "Wade Rivers." "The fence won't fix itself," Wade grinned, a flash of warmth that transformed his weathered face. "Duty calls." "Thank you for the water, Miss Richardson." "Penelope," she heard herself say. "You can call me Penelope. Only if you call me Wade." He settled his hat back on his head and touched the brim in farewell. "I hope to see you again, Penelope." He left, and she stood in the doorway watching him return to his work. Something had shifted in the air, like the moment before a summer storm when everything holds its breath. That evening, Penelope sat on the porch with her mending as the heat of the day finally began to break. Wade had finished with the fence and moved on to the barn roof, working until the light failed. She heard him moving around in the barn, settling in for the night. Mrs. Chen had been right about him being handy. In one day, he had accomplished repairs that had been needed for months. "You watch him like you're trying to solve a puzzle," Mrs. Chen said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of tea. "I'm just curious," Penelope protested, accepting the cup. "He's different from the other men in town. He doesn't know your story yet. Maybe, Or maybe he just doesn't care about gossip. Mrs. Chen made a non-committal sound. Be careful, Penelope. Your heart has been broken enough. I'm not interested in him that way, Penelope said, even as something in her chest tightened at the lie. I'm just surprised to meet someone who treats me like a human being instead of a hex. But that night, lying in bed and listening to the desert wind, Penelope couldn't stop thinking about the way Wade had looked at her. Like she was a woman, not a warning. Like she was beautiful, not cursed. The next morning, she woke to find a pile of fresh cut wood outside her door, enough to last through the coming winter. When she went downstairs to thank Wade, Mrs. Chen informed her that he had ridden out before dawn, hired for a 3-day job at one of the nearby ranches. Penelope told herself the disappointment she felt was ridiculous. She barely knew the man, but she found herself listening for the sound of hoofbeats each evening, watching the road from her window, waiting for his return. He came back on the 4th day, riding a buckskin mare with a white blaze and carrying a month's worth of desert dust on his clothes. Penelope was hanging laundry when she saw him, and she had to force herself not to stare. He dismounted, spoke briefly with Mrs. Chen, then headed to the barn. 20 minutes later he emerged, clean-shaven and wearing a fresh shirt, and walked directly to where Penelope was working. I brought you something, he said without preamble, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a bundle wrapped in brown paper and handed it to her. Penelope set down her laundry basket and unwrapped the package carefully. Inside were 3 books, their covers worn but still intact. Pride and Prejudice, Wuthering Heights, and a collection of Wordsworth's poetry. The ranch owner's wife was selling off some things, Wade explained. When I saw these, I thought of you. You strike me as someone who likes to read. Penelope's throat tightened. She couldn't remember the last time someone had given her a gift that wasn't born of obligation or pity. How did you know? I saw the book on your windowsill. The tenant of Wildfell Hall. Figured if you liked Anne Bront, you might like her sister too. He shifted his weight, suddenly uncertain. If I overstepped, I apologize. No, Penelope said quickly, clutching the books to her chest. No, this is wonderful. Thank you, Wade. I don't know what to say. Say you'll have dinner with me tonight. Mrs. Chen's making stew and she's invited me to join. I'd like it if you were there too. It wasn't a romantic proposition, not exactly. Just a shared meal at a boarding house. But the way he was looking at her, hopeful and earnest, made it feel like more. The town won't like it, Penelope said softly. They'll talk. Let them talk. I've never put much stock in what other people think I should do. He took a step closer, close enough that she could smell sage and leather and something uniquely him. I'm asking you, Penelope. Not the stories, not the gossip. You. She wanted to say yes. She wanted it so badly it frightened her. But the memory of 3 graves rose up in her mind, a wall between her and anything good that might be waiting on the other side. I can't, she whispered. Wade, there are things you don't understand, things people say about me that are. Let me guess, he interrupted gently. They say you're cursed, that your husband's died and anyone who gets close to you is doomed. He said it matter-of-factly, without judgment or fear. I heard the stories my 2nd day in town. The bartender couldn't wait to tell me about the beautiful widow who carried death in her shadow. Penelope felt like she had been punched. Then why? Because I've been cursed myself. According to some people, my family lost everything in the war. I've been shot, stabbed, trampled, and thrown off more horses than I can count. According to the last town I lived in, I was bad luck because I survived when good men died at Gettysburg. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her hand. I don't believe in curses, Penelope. I believe in bad luck and worse timing and a world that sometimes breaks people for no reason. But I also believe in second chances, third chances, As many chances as it takes to find something good. His hand was warm, calloused, solid. Real. Penelope looked down at their joined fingers and felt something crack open inside her chest. Some locked door she had kept barred since she had buried Thomas in the desert. "Just dinner," Wade said. "That's all I'm asking." "Just dinner," Penelope agreed, and when she smiled, it felt like the first genuine thing she had done in months. That evening, Mrs. Chen's kitchen smelled of beef and vegetables and fresh bread. The table was set for 3, and the older woman presided over the meal like a benevolent empress. She served generous portions and kept the conversation moving, asking Wade about his travels and sharing stories about her late husband, who had worked on the railroad before his death. Penelope found herself relaxing, drawn into the easy rhythm of the talk. Wade was a natural storyteller, describing the places he had been with vivid detail, but without bragging. He had worked cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, had spent a winter in the Colorado mountains, had even traveled as far as California before deciding he preferred the desert. "What brought you to Globe?" Penelope asked as Mrs. Chen cleared the plates. "Heard they needed skilled hands at the ranches around here. Mining towns usually do, since most men would rather dig for silver than herd cattle." He leaned back in his chair, cradling his coffee cup. "But mostly I was tired of moving. Been doing it for 15 years now, since I was 17. Figured it might be time to find a place to settle." "Globe might not be that place," Mrs. Chen said dryly. "The silver won't last forever. These boom towns never do." "Maybe not," Wade agreed. "But I like the mountains, and the people I've met so far give me reason to stay." His eyes were on Penelope when he said it, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. Mrs. Chen noticed, of course, and made a satisfied sound as she brought out a pie for dessert. After dinner, Wade walked Penelope upstairs to her room. They moved slowly, neither wanting the evening to end. At her door, he stopped and turned to face her. "I meant what I said earlier," he told her. "I don't believe in your curse, but I understand if you're not ready to trust that yet." "I'm a patient man, Penelope. I can wait." "Wait for what?" she asked, even though she knew. "For you to see yourself the way I see you, beautiful, strong, deserving of good things." He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so tender it made her eyes sting. "For you to believe that maybe the bad luck is behind you, that maybe it's time for something good." Penelope closed her eyes against the sudden threat of tears. "What if you're wrong? What if something happens to you? What if it doesn't? What if we waste the time we could have together being afraid of shadows?" He waited until she opened her eyes, then smiled at her. "I'm not saying we rush into anything. I'm just saying let's see what happens, one day at a time. Can you do that?" She thought about the alternative. More lonely evenings, more pitying looks, more years of being the cursed widow that Globe couldn't quite drive away but would never accept. She thought about Wade's gray eyes and his gift of books, and the way he said her name like it was something precious. "One day at a time," she agreed. His smile widened. "That's all I need." He touched her cheek just once, his palm rough and warm, then he stepped back, put his hat on, and headed for the stairs. "Good night, Penelope." "Good night, Wade." She went into her room and closed the door, leaning against it as she heard his footsteps descend. Then she crossed to the window and watched him walk to the barn, his silhouette dark against the moonlit yard. Before he went inside, he turned and looked up at her window. Even from a distance, she could feel the weight of his gaze, the promise in it. Penelope picked up the copy of Pride and Prejudice he had given her and opened it to the first page. The candlelight flickered across the words as she began to read, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the future felt like something other than an endless expanse of loss. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that felt almost normal. Wade took on work around town, building a reputation as someone reliable and skilled. Penelope continued her sewing, slowly expanding her circle of clients as word spread about the quality of her work. And every evening, unless Wade was out at her ranch, they shared dinner with Mrs. Chen. The town noticed, of course. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. People warned Wade away, told him the stories about her dead husbands with increasing desperation. A few even claimed to be concerned for his immortal soul, suggesting that Penelope had made deals with dark forces. Wade listened politely, thanked them for their concern, and ignored every word. His public dismissal of the curse began to have an effect. A few of the younger men started tipping their hats to Penelope on the street. One of the miners' wives actually smiled at her at the general store. It wasn't much, but it was more acceptance than she had experienced since arriving in Globe. Not everyone was pleased by this development. A group of the town's more religious citizens, led by a pinch-faced woman named Mrs. Dalton, began a campaign to drive Penelope out. They circulated a petition. They preached about the dangers of allowing evil to flourish in their midst. They made it their mission to remind everyone at every opportunity that 3 men had died, and the common thread was Penelope Richardson. Wade confronted Mrs. Dalton outside the church one Sunday morning. Penelope wasn't there to witness it, but half the town was, and the story spread like wildfire. "Mrs. Dalton," Wade had said, his voice carrying across the churchyard, "I've listened to you and your friends spread poison about Miss Richardson for weeks now. I've been patient because I was raised to respect my elders, and because I hoped you'd eventually recognize your own cruelty. But since that doesn't seem to be happening, let me make something clear. Penelope Richardson is a good woman who has suffered terrible losses. The fact that you've chosen to add to that suffering instead of offering Christian charity says more about you than it ever could about her." Mrs. Dalton had sputtered, outraged. "That woman is a curse on this town. Mark my words, young man, you'll regret defending her. You'll end up like her other husbands, dead in the ground while she moves on to her next victim." "If that's God's will, then I'll face it like a man," Wade had replied. "But I don't believe God works that way, and neither should you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have better things to do than listen to gossip dressed up as righteousness." He had walked away, leaving Mrs. Dalton speechless and the crowd buzzing. By the time Penelope heard the story from Mrs. Chen that evening, it had already become legend. Wade had defended her honor in front of half the town and hadn't backed down an inch. When he came for dinner that night, Penelope pulled him aside before they went into the kitchen. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, torn between gratitude and fear. "You've made enemies now." "I've had worse enemies," Wade said easily. "Besides, someone needed to say it. Those women have been tormenting you for months. It's about time someone stood up for you. They're going to make your life difficult. Let them try." He took her hands in his expression serious. "Penelope, I need you to understand something. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever the town says, whatever they do, I'm staying right here. Because when I look at you, I see a future worth fighting for." Her breath caught. "Wade, we've only known each other a few weeks." "I know. And I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or even next month. I'm just asking you to believe that I mean what I say. I'm here. I'm staying. And whatever happens, we'll face it together." Penelope wanted to argue, to list all the reasons this was a terrible idea, to protect him from the fate that seemed to follow her. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw nothing but certainty. He had chosen her, curse and all, and he wasn't going to be dissuaded. "Together," she whispered, and let herself believe it might be possible. After that confrontation, the dynamic in Globe shifted. The petition against Penelope quietly disappeared. Mrs. Dalton's group still muttered and glared, but they stopped their open campaign. And Wade's defense had an unexpected consequence. A few people started to question the narrative they had accepted so easily. One afternoon, a young doctor named Samuel Harris stopped by Mrs. Chen's boarding house. He was newly arrived in Globe, hired to tend to the miners and their families, and he had heard the stories about Penelope. But unlike most, his interest was professional rather than superstitious. "Miss Richardson," he said when she answered the door, "I hope I'm not intruding. I'm Dr. Harris. I've been reviewing the medical records available in town, and I came across the reports from your husband's death." "Thomas Richardson, correct." Penelope felt her chest tighten. "Yes, what about him?" "I don't mean to cause you pain by bringing this up, but I noticed the symptoms described in the report: fever, delirium, and rapid decline, and I believe I know what killed him. There's been an outbreak of typhoid in several towns along the trail routes from Texas to Arizona. The timing and symptoms match perfectly." "Typhoid," Penelope repeated numbly. "A bacterial infection spread through contaminated water. It's quite common in areas where sanitation is poor, like trail camps. Several travelers have died from it this year alone." Dr. Harris met her eyes sympathetically. "What I'm trying to say, Miss Richardson, is that your husband's death was not mysterious or supernatural. It was a disease, tragic but entirely explainable." Penelope sank down onto the porch steps, her legs suddenly weak. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm a man of science and I don't believe in curses. I've also heard about your previous losses. Consumption is tragically common, and accidents with livestock kill dozens of men every year. There's nothing unusual about your story except the superstition people have attached to it." He hesitated. "I thought you should know that, and I thought perhaps if people understood the medical facts, they might reconsider their treatment of you." Before Penelope could respond, Wade appeared around the corner of the house, his expression cautious. "Everything all right here, Doctor?" Harris introduced himself and explained what he had just told Penelope. Wade listened intently, then shook the doctor's hand with genuine warmth. "Thank you," Wade said. "Would you be willing to share those findings with others in town?" "I intend to," Dr. Harris said. "Mrs. Dalton actually called me to her home yesterday, claiming she had proof of Miss Richardson's evil nature. I examined her evidence, which consisted entirely of coincidence and hearsay, and I told her as much. She was not pleased. Despite everything, Penelope laughed. The sound was shaky but real. I imagine she wasn't. Medical facts rarely please people who have already made up their minds, Dr. Harris said dryly, but I'll continue to present them nonetheless. It's my responsibility as a physician. He tipped his hat to both of them. "Good day, Miss Richardson, Mr. Rivers. I hope to see you both at the town social next week. It's time Globe started treating you like the respectable citizens you are." He left, and Penelope turned to Wade with wide eyes. "Did that just happen?" "It did." Wade sat down beside her on the steps, close enough that their shoulders touched. "See, the curse is breaking, or more accurately, people are starting to use their common sense. Because of you, because you stood up for me. Because it was the right thing to do, and because you're worth standing up for." He bumped her shoulder gently with his. "How are you feeling?" That conversation looked intense. "I feel lighter," Penelope admitted. "Like I've been carrying a weight I didn't even fully realize was there. Hearing Dr. Harris explain about the typhoid, it doesn't bring Thomas back, but it makes it feel less like the universe is punishing me." "The universe isn't punishing you. The universe just is. Sometimes terrible things happen, and there's no reason, no purpose. We survive them and we keep going, and eventually, if we're lucky, we find something worth surviving for." Penelope turned to look at him, this cowboy who had ridden into her life and refused to be scared away by ghost stories and superstition. The afternoon sun caught in his hair, turning it gold at the edges, and his gray eyes were steady on hers. "Is that what I am to you?" she asked quietly. "Something worth surviving for." "You're everything worth surviving for," Wade said, and then he was kissing her. It was gentle, tentative, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Penelope didn't want to pull away. She wanted to lean into the warmth of him, to feel his hands cup her face like she was something precious, to taste hope on his lips and believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have this. When they finally broke apart, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks." "I've been wanting you to," Penelope confessed. "I'm courting you now," Wade said firmly. "Properly, publicly, so there's no question about my intentions. I'm going to take you to that town social Dr. Harris mentioned. I'm going to dance with you where everyone can see. And I'm going to make sure every person in Globe knows that I consider it an honor to be by your side. Wade, you don't have to. I want to. I want everyone to know that I'm the luckiest man in Arizona because Penelope Richardson lets me hold her hand." He proved his point by lacing his fingers through hers. "If that bothers you, if it's too much too fast, tell me. But if you're worried about what people will say or think, don't be. I stopped caring about that the day I met you." Penelope looked at their joined hands, then back up at his face. She saw determination there and affection and the beginning of something that looked a lot like love. It terrified her. It also made her feel more alive than she had in years. "The town social is on Saturday," she said. "I'll need to make a new dress." Wade's smile was brilliant. "You'd look beautiful in a flour sack, but I'll look forward to seeing whatever you create." He stood and pulled her to her feet. "Now, I believe Mrs. Chen is making fried chicken for dinner, and I intend to eat my weight in it while telling you about the absolutely ridiculous horse I had to break today." They went inside together, hand in hand, and if Mrs. Chen noticed the new energy between them, she was wise enough to simply smile into her cooking and say nothing. The week leading up to the town social passed in a blur of nervous excitement. Penelope worked on her dress in every spare moment, creating something simple but elegant from deep blue fabric she had been saving. Mrs. Chen helped with the more intricate beadwork, and even contributed a shawl that had belonged to her mother in China, claiming the indigo silk would complement the dress perfectly. Wade continued his work around town, but he made a point of walking Penelope to the general store, to the church, anywhere she needed to go. He was staking a public claim, showing Globe that he wasn't ashamed to be associated with her. The reactions were mixed, everything from grudging acceptance to continued hostility, but slowly, incrementally, things were changing. 2 days before the social, Penelope received an unexpected visitor. She was on the porch, hemming her new dress, when a well-dressed woman in her 40s approached. Penelope recognized her as Mrs. Thornton, the wife of one of the more successful mine owners. "Miss Richardson," Mrs. Thornton said, her voice formal but not unkind. "May I speak with you for a moment?" "Of course." Penelope set aside her sewing, bracing herself for another lecture about bringing evil into town, but Mrs. Thornton surprised her. "I wanted to apologize. I've participated in the gossip about you, and I've encouraged others to avoid you after speaking with Dr. Harris, and after watching how Mr. Rivers behaves toward you, I've realized how cruel and unfair I've been." Penelope blinked, speechless. Mrs. Thornton continued, "I lost my first husband to a mining accident. I was 21, alone in a strange place, and people treated me with such kindness during that time. I should have extended the same kindness to you instead of listening to superstitious nonsense. I'm deeply sorry." "I don't know what to say," Penelope managed. You don't need to say anything. I just wanted you to know that you'll have at least one friend at the social on Saturday, and I intend to have a stern conversation with Mrs. Dalton and her circle about Christian charity and the difference between faith and fear-mongering." Mrs. Thornton's expression turned steely. "They won't like it, but my husband owns a significant portion of this town. They'll listen." After she left, Penelope sat in stunned silence until Wade returned from the ranch. When she told him what had happened, he laughed and spun her around the porch. "You see," he said, setting her back on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. "The curse is well and truly broken. Now it's just you and me and a future we get to build together." "We should probably survive the town's social first," Penelope said, but she was smiling. "We'll more than survive it. We'll dance every dance, eat too much cake, and make sure everyone knows that you're the prettiest woman in Globe, Arizona." He kissed her forehead. "And then, maybe a few months from now, when people have gotten used to seeing us together, I'm going to ask you a very important question." Penelope's heart skipped. "What question?" "You'll have to wait and see. I'm a patient man, remember, but I promise it'll be worth the wait." Saturday arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, and a temperature that promised a comfortable evening. The social was held in the largest building in town, a community hall that served as everything from church to courthouse to dance floor as needed. By the time Wade and Penelope arrived, the space was already crowded with families and couples, all dressed in their best clothes. The room fell silent when they walked in together. Every eye turned to watch as Wade, looking handsome in a black coat and string tie, guided Penelope toward the refreshment table. She wore her blue dress and Mrs. Chen's silk shawl, her auburn hair pinned up in a style that Wade had said made her look like a painting. Mrs. Thornton broke the silence, moving toward them with a welcoming smile. "Miss Richardson, Mr. Rivers, how wonderful to see you. Penelope, you must meet my friends. Mrs. Garcia, Mrs. Schultz, this is the seamstress I was telling you about. Her work is exquisite." Just like that, the spell broke. Conversations resumed. A few people still stared, and Mrs. Dalton looked like she had swallowed something bitter, but the hostility Penelope had expected didn't materialize. Mrs. Thornton had clearly been busy spreading a different narrative, and her social influence was strong enough to counteract some of the superstition. When the music started, Wade led Penelope onto the dance floor. She hadn't danced in years, not since before her first husband got sick, and she stumbled at first. But Wade was patient and skilled, guiding her through the steps until she relaxed into the rhythm. "You're doing great," he murmured as they spun past the other couples. "I feel like everyone is watching us." "They are. Let them. Let them see how happy we are. Let them see that you're not cursed. You're just a woman who deserves to smile and dance and be treated with respect." By the third dance, other couples had joined them on the floor, and Penelope began to truly enjoy herself. Wade was an excellent dancer, and he held her just properly enough for public consumption while still managing to make her feel cherished. When the music shifted to a waltz, he pulled her infinitesimally closer. "I could do this forever," he said softly. "Dance, be with you. Dance, talk, work, eat, sleep, wake up, all of it, every day, forever." Penelope's breath caught. "Wade, I know, we're taking it slow. One day at a time. I'm just saying that every day with you makes me more certain about what I want." He smiled down at her. "You're it, Penelope. You're what I've been looking for all these years of wandering." She wanted to tell him she felt the same way. That somewhere between his gift of books and his defense of her honor and the way he said her name, she had fallen completely in love with him. But the words stuck in her throat, held back by years of loss and fear. Wade seemed to understand. "It's all right. You don't have to say anything yet. I can wait." They danced until Penelope's feet hurt and her face ached from smiling. Wade introduced her to ranchers he worked for, miners he knew, families he had helped. Each interaction was easy, natural, and it gradually dawned on Penelope that she was being absorbed into the community. Not as the cursed widow, but as Wade Rivers' sweetheart, a woman with a future instead of just a tragic past. The evening ended with cake and coffee, served by the church ladies who had previously treated Penelope like a plague carrier. Mrs. Dalton was notably absent from the serving table, and Penelope later learned she had left early, unable to stomach the sight of the town accepting the woman she had worked so hard to ostracize. As Wade walked Penelope home through the moonlit streets, she felt something shift inside her. The fear that had lived in her chest for so long, the certainty that she was doomed to lose everyone she loved, finally began to loosen its grip. "Thank you," she said as they approached Mrs. Chen's boarding house. "For what? For seeing me. For defending me. For being patient with me." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "For making me believe I could have this." Wade cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle. "You can have anything you want, Penelope. A home, a family, a life full of joy and love. The only thing stopping you is fear, and I promise you, I will spend every day proving that fear wrong." "I love you," Penelope whispered, and it felt like stepping off a cliff into open air. Wade's smile was incandescent. "I love you too. I have since the day you shared your water with a dusty cowboy who needed more than a drink. You gave me hope, Penelope. You gave me a reason to stop wandering and start building something real." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Penelope felt the last walls around her heart crumble. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "I'm still not proposing tonight," Wade said, his voice rough with emotion. "But soon, Penelope. Very soon. If you'll have me." "I'll have you," she promised. "Curse or no curse, bad luck or good, I'll have you." "There's no curse," Wade said firmly. "There's just us, and the life we're going to build together." They stood in the moonlight, holding each other, and Penelope let herself believe in happy endings again. The months that followed were the happiest of Penelope's life. Wade continued to work the ranches around Globe, saving money and making plans. Penelope's sewing business flourished as more women in town came to her for dresses and alterations. Mrs. Thornton became a genuine friend, inviting Penelope to afternoon teas and introducing her to the other respectable women of Globe. Dr. Harris published a letter in the town newspaper explaining the medical facts behind Penelope's husband's deaths, systematically dismantling the cursed narrative with science and logic. A few die-hard believers clung to their superstitions, but most people accepted the truth once it was presented clearly. Wade and Penelope fell into a comfortable rhythm of courtship. He took her on picnics in the foothills, where they could see the whole valley spread out below them. She cooked him dinners at Mrs. Chen's, gradually learning his preferences and quirks. They read together in the evenings, sometimes aloud, sometimes in companionable silence. They talked about everything, their pasts, their dreams, their fears, building a foundation of trust and understanding. Winter came to the desert, brief but beautiful, bringing cold nights and occasional frost. Wade moved out of Mrs. Chen's barn and into a small house he rented on the edge of town, proper now that he was courting seriously. But he still came to the boarding house every evening for dinner, and he still walked Penelope home afterward, stealing kisses in the shadows on Christmas Eve. The town held a celebration at the community hall. Wade and Penelope arrived together, and this time, no one stared. They were simply another courting couple, accepted and unremarkable. Mrs. Dalton had even managed a tight-lipped nod in Penelope's direction, which felt like a victory. After the festivities, Wade suggested they walk to the hill overlooking the town. Penelope agreed, curious about the unusual request. The night was cold but clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. They reached the hilltop, and Wade turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Penelope Richardson," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person. You've made me believe in home and family and futures worth fighting for. You've shown me what courage looks like, and you've trusted me with your heart even though you were afraid. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that trust was well placed." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. When he opened it, Penelope saw a simple gold band set with a small sapphire, the stone the same deep blue as her dress from the social. "I'm not a rich man," Wade continued, dropping to one knee in the dirt. "I can't promise you luxury or ease. But I can promise you love, loyalty, and a partner who will stand by you through whatever comes. Marry me, Penelope. Let me be your husband, your friend, your home. Let me prove to you every day that you were never cursed. You were just waiting for the right person to see how extraordinary you are." Tears streamed down Penelope's face as she looked at this man. This wonderful, stubborn, loving man who had ridden into her life and refused to leave. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the losses and the grief and the long, lonely months when she believed she would always be alone. And she thought about the future Wade was offering, full of possibility and hope. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, I'll marry you. I love you, Wade Rivers. You called me beautiful when the town called me cursed, and you proved them all wrong. You proved me wrong. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Wade slipped the ring onto her finger, then lifted her off the ground and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, he kissed her with such tenderness that Penelope felt her heart might burst. "We're going to be so happy," Wade promised against her lips. "I swear to you, Penelope, I'm going to make you so happy." "You already have," she whispered back. They announced their engagement on Christmas morning at church. Mrs. Thornton was the first to congratulate them, followed by Dr. Harris and a steady stream of well-wishers. Even some of the people who had shunned Penelope offered their congratulations, sheepish now about their previous treatment of her. Mrs. Dalton was noticeably absent, but Penelope found she didn't care. She had Wade, she had friends, and she had a future that gleamed bright as the sapphire on her finger. They planned a spring wedding, wanting to give themselves time to prepare and to let Wade save a bit more money. In the meantime, Penelope worked on her wedding dress, pouring all her skill and love into creating something beautiful. Mrs. Chen insisted on hosting the reception at the boarding house, and Mrs. Thornton volunteered to coordinate the food and decorations. The town gradually completed its transformation in its treatment of Penelope. She was invited to join the ladies' auxiliary at the church. Several families hired her to make christening gowns and confirmation dresses. Children who had once run from her now smiled and waved. The change was remarkable, and it reinforced what Wade had told her from the beginning. The curse had only ever existed in people's minds. In early March, Wade came to dinner with barely contained excitement. He waited until they had finished eating, and Mrs. Chen had retired to the kitchen before he spoke. "I've been offered a foreman position at the Double R Ranch," he told Penelope, his eyes bright. "It comes with a house, a good salary, and the chance to buy into the ranch eventually if I prove myself. I'd be working with the owner's son, teaching him the ranching business. It's everything I've been hoping for, Penelope. A real future, not just odd jobs and temporary work." "Wade, that's wonderful." Penelope threw her arms around him, genuinely thrilled. "You deserve this. You've worked so hard." "There's more," Wade said, holding her close. "The house is big enough for a family, plenty of room for children when we're ready. And the owner, Mr. Reynolds, told me he's impressed by how I've conducted myself in town. He said it takes character to stand up for what's right when everyone else is following the crowd. He called me exactly the kind of man he wants working for him." Penelope pulled back to look at him. "You got the job because you defended me. I got the job because I'm good at what I do. But Mr. Reynolds made it clear that my integrity mattered as much as my skills. Apparently, his wife is friends with Mrs. Thornton, and she's been singing your praises. She told him that any man wise enough to recognize your worth was wise enough to trust with responsibility." Wade grinned. "So in a way, you got me the job." "We got it together," Penelope corrected. "That's how this works now, right? We're a team." "The best team," Wade agreed. He kissed her softly. "I start in 2 weeks, which means we need to move up the wedding date if you're amenable. I don't want to live in that house without you, and it wouldn't be proper for you to move in before we're married." "How much are we moving it up?" 3 weeks. "I know it's fast, but we've waited long enough, don't you think? We know we want to be together. The only thing stopping us is convention, and I think we've both proven we don't care much about that." Penelope considered. Her dress was nearly finished. The reception plans were flexible, and Wade was right. They had waited long enough. She had spent too many years being afraid, letting the past dictate her future. It was time to step fully into the life she wanted. 3 weeks, she agreed, "but we're still having a proper wedding. I want to stand up in front of this town and marry you with my head held high." "We'll have the finest wedding Globe has ever seen," Wade promised. "Small but perfect, just family and real friends, the people who matter." They spent the next 3 weeks in a whirlwind of preparation. Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Thornton took over most of the logistics, leaving Penelope free to focus on her dress and her trousseau. Wade worked his final jobs in town and began preparing for his new position, meeting with Mr. Reynolds to discuss plans and responsibilities. The night before the wedding, Mrs. Chen insisted on a traditional separation of bride and groom. Wade returned to his rented house, and Penelope stayed at the boarding house, surrounded by the women who had become her support system. Mrs. Thornton, Mrs. Chen, Dr. Harris's wife Anne, and even some of the Mexican women Penelope had sewn for gathered for an impromptu celebration. "I'm so happy for you," Mrs. Thornton said, raising a glass of wine and toast. "You and Mr. Rivers are proof that love conquers all, even small-minded superstition." "To love," the other women echoed, and Penelope felt overwhelmed by gratitude for these friendships that had seemed impossible 6 months ago. Later, alone in her room, Penelope stood by the window and looked out at the moonlit desert. Tomorrow, she would marry Wade. Tomorrow she would become his wife, would bind her life to his, would take the risk she had sworn she would never take again. The old fear tried to surface, whispering what if something happens to him, but Penelope pushed it away. Wade was right. They could spend their lives afraid of shadows, or they could choose to be brave and reach for happiness. She chose happiness. The wedding took place on a Saturday afternoon in late March. The church was decorated with wildflowers from the desert, their vibrant colors a testament to spring's arrival. The guest list was small, perhaps 30 people, but every one of them was genuinely happy for the couple. Penelope wore her blue dress, her auburn hair crowned with a simple wreath of flowers. She carried a bouquet of white desert lilies that Wade had spent hours searching for in the foothills. When she walked down the aisle on Mrs. Chen's arm, every eye was on her, but this time the attention felt like blessing rather than curse. Wade stood at the altar in a new suit, his gray eyes locked on her from the moment she appeared. The expression on his face, awe, love, absolute certainty, made Penelope's heart soar. This was the man who had chosen her when everyone else had turned away. This was the man who saw her for who she truly was and loved her anyway, loved her because of it. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love and honor each other in sickness and health, for better or worse, until death parted them. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed her with such tenderness that several people in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The reception at Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a joyful affair. There was food and music and dancing. Mr. Reynolds attended with his wife, welcoming Wade officially into the Double R family and telling Penelope she would always have a place in their community. Dr. Harris gave a toast about love being the best medicine. Mrs. Thornton cried happy tears and promised to visit often. As the sun began to set, Wade and Penelope slipped away from the party. They rode together on Wade's horse to the Double R Ranch, to the house that would be their first real home together. Wade had prepared it as a surprise, filling it with furniture he had built himself and small touches that showed how much thought he had put into making it theirs. "Welcome home, Mrs. Rivers," Wade said, lifting her off the horse and carrying her over the threshold. Penelope looked around the main room, taking in the sturdy table, the comfortable chairs, the fireplace ready to warm winter nights. It was simple but solid, a place where they could build a life. "It's perfect," she said, wrapping her arms around Wade's neck. "You're perfect." "I'm far from perfect," Wade corrected, setting her on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. "But I'm perfectly in love with you, that's enough." He kissed her then, and it was different from their previous kisses. This one held promise and heat, and the knowledge that they had all the time in the world. They were husband and wife now, bound together by choice and love and commitment. That night, in their new home, Wade proved to Penelope in the most intimate way possible that she was not cursed. She was cherished, desired, loved beyond measure. And when she fell asleep in his arms, she felt safer and more content than she had ever felt in her life. The first year of their marriage was one of discovery and joy. Wade excelled in his new position, proving himself invaluable to Mr. Reynolds and earning the respect of the other ranch hands. Penelope continued her sewing work, setting up a small workroom in their house where she could take on commissions. They fell into easy partnership, supporting each other's endeavors and building a home together. The town of Globe continued to grow and change. The silver mines remained productive, bringing new people and new opportunities. Penelope and Wade became pillars of their small community at the Double R, hosting dinners and helping new families settle in. The stories about Penelope's curse faded into forgotten history, replaced by newer gossip and more interesting scandals. Mrs. Dalton eventually moved away, unable to reconcile herself to Penelope's acceptance in the community. Mrs. Chen sold her boarding house and moved into a smaller cottage closer to the Reynolds ranch, insisting she wanted to be near Penelope. Mrs. Thornton remained a close friend, and the group of women who had supported Penelope before her wedding became an unofficial family. In their second year of marriage, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She couldn't help but remember the stories, couldn't help but fear that something would go wrong. But Wade was patient and reassuring, reminding her that they had already defeated the curse, that this was just the next chapter in their story. Dr. Harris monitored the pregnancy carefully, and Mrs. Thornton made sure Penelope had everything she needed. Wade became almost comically overprotective, treating Penelope like she was made of glass. She alternated between being touched by his concern and exasperated by his hovering. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she told him one evening as he insisted on doing all the housework himself. "I know that. I just want to take care of you." Wade set down the dishes he was washing and came to where she sat. He placed his hand on her growing belly, his expression softening. "I want to take care of both of you. Is that so terrible?" "It's not terrible. It's sweet." "But Wade, I need you to trust that I'm going to be all right. We're both going to be all right." He met her eyes, and she saw the fear there that he usually kept hidden. "I'm scared," he admitted quietly. "Not because I believe in the curse, but because you mean everything to me. The thought of anything happening to you or our baby terrifies me." Penelope took his face in her hands. "Then let's be scared together, but let's not let fear control us. We've come too far for that. We're going to have this baby, and it's going to be beautiful and healthy, and we're going to be a family. That's the story we're writing, Wade. Not tragedy, but triumph." He kissed her palm, then her lips. "Triumph," he agreed. "I like the sound of that." Their son was born on a hot August day in 1885. The labor was long and difficult, but both Penelope and the baby came through it safely. When Dr. Harris placed the squalling infant in Wade's arms, the cowboy's eyes filled with tears. "He's perfect," Wade whispered, staring at his son in wonder. "Penelope, he's absolutely perfect." They named him Matthew, after Wade's father who had died during the war. Matthew Rivers entered the world with a full head of dark hair and his father's gray eyes, and he was loved beyond measure from his first breath. The curse that had followed Penelope for so long was finally, irrevocably broken. She had a husband who adored her, a healthy son, and a life full of purpose and joy. The town that had once shunned her now celebrated her family's good fortune. Even the last holdouts against her had to admit that there was nothing cursed about Penelope Rivers. Over the next few years, their family grew. A daughter named Sarah arrived 2 years after Matthew, followed by another son, Daniel, 2 years later. Each pregnancy was easier than the last, as Penelope's confidence grew and the last remnants of fear fell away. Their house rang with laughter and children's voices, and Wade proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband. Wade's career flourished. Mr. Reynolds made good on his promise, selling Wade a stake in the Double R Ranch when Matthew was 3. Wade became a full partner, with a say in the ranch's operations and a share of the profits. They would never be wealthy, but they were comfortable, with enough to provide for their children and save for the future. Penelope's sewing evolved into a small business that employed 2 other women from the area. She designed and created custom garments for clients as far away as Tucson, building a reputation for quality and artistry. Mrs. Thornton helped her navigate the business aspects, and together they created something sustainable and successful. Life was not without challenges. They faced harsh winters and dry summers, sick livestock and fluctuating markets. Penelope's old grief surfaced sometimes, usually on the anniversaries of her previous husband's deaths. But Wade was always there to hold her through the dark moments, to remind her that the past did not dictate the future. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wade took Penelope back to the hill where he had proposed. They left the children with Mrs. Chen for the evening and rode out to watch the sunset over Globe. "You remember standing here 10 years ago?" Wade asked, holding her close as the sky turned gold and crimson. "I remember everything about that night," Penelope said. "I remember being terrified and hopeful and so desperately in love with you that I couldn't imagine saying anything but yes. I knew even then that you were the best thing that would ever happen to me, but I had no idea just how true that was." Wade turned her to face him. "You've given me everything, Penelope. A home, a family, a purpose. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible. I would live through all those years of wandering again, through every hardship and disappointment if I knew it would lead me back to you." Tears gathered in Penelope's eyes. "You called me beautiful when everyone else called me cursed. You saw me when I felt invisible. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me back my life, Wade." "We gave each other our lives," Wade corrected. "That's what love does. It multiplies everything good and divides everything hard. We're better together than we ever could have been apart." They stood on the hill as the sun sank below the horizon, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. Below them, Globe glittered with lamplight, the town that had once rejected Penelope, now the place she proudly called home. Years continued to pass in a blur of family dinners and ranch work and quiet evenings on the porch. Matthew grew tall and strong like his father, with his mother's quick mind and compassion. Sarah was fiercely independent and creative, showing a talent for drawing that delighted Penelope. Daniel was the peacemaker, thoughtful and gentle, always ready to help anyone who needed it. Wade taught his sons everything he knew about ranching, about treating animals with respect and reading the land and building something lasting with your own two hands. Penelope taught her daughter to sew and to stand up for herself, and to judge people by their character rather than gossip. Mrs. Chen lived to see all three children grown, passing away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. At her funeral, Penelope spoke about the Chinese widow who had taken in a cursed woman when no one else would, who had shown her that family was about choice rather than blood. Mrs. Chen's kindness had changed the trajectory of Penelope's life, and she would be forever grateful. Mrs. Thornton remained a close friend until her own death some years later. She and Penelope had lunch together every week without fail, discussing everything from business to books to the challenges of raising children. When Mrs. Thornton fell ill, Penelope sat by her bedside, reading aloud from their favorite novels and holding her hand. At the end, Mrs. Thornton smiled and said, "You were never cursed, my dear. You were blessed, and you just had to wait for the right people to see it." Dr. Harris continued to practice in Globe until he retired, eventually handing over his practice to a younger doctor he had trained. He remained friends with the Rivers family, delivering their children and treating their ailments with the same careful attention he had shown Penelope all those years ago, when he had explained the medical facts behind her tragedies. As Penelope and Wade entered middle age, they watched their children grow into remarkable adults. Matthew took over more of the ranch operations, allowing Wade to slow down without completely retiring. He married a teacher from Phoenix, a smart and warm woman who fit seamlessly into the family. Sarah moved to Tucson to study art, returning home with a portfolio of stunning paintings and a quiet determination to make a name for herself. Daniel became a veterinarian, studying in California before returning to Globe to open his own practice. One evening, sitting on their porch and watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Matthew having provided them with two and Sarah with one, Penelope leaned her head on Wade's shoulder. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked. "When you first rode into Globe, did you imagine we'd end up here?" "I imagined something," Wade said, his voice rough with age but still strong. "I saw you on that porch, beautiful and sad, and I knew I wanted to be the one to make you smile. I knew I wanted to know you, to understand what made you look at the world the way you did. But this—" He gestured at the yard, at their children and grandchildren. "This exceeded my wildest dreams." "Mine too," Penelope admitted. "There were so many times I almost gave up, so many times I almost ran away because it seemed easier than staying and facing the judgment. If I had left, if I had listened to my fear, I would have missed all of this. But you didn't leave. You stayed and you fought and you let me love you even though you were scared." Wade kissed her temple. "That took courage, Penelope. More courage than most people ever have to show." "I think we were both courageous. You for standing up to the town, me for believing you when you said I wasn't cursed." She lifted her head to look at him. "We saved each other, Wade, in all the ways that matter." He cupped her face, his touch still tender after all these years. "We did. And I'd do it all over again, every single day, for the rest of my life." They kissed as the sun set, two people who had weathered storms and emerged stronger, who had built a life of love and purpose from the ashes of tragedy and superstition. Their story was proof that curses could be broken, that small-minded fear could be overcome, and that love, when given the chance, could heal even the deepest wounds. As twilight descended on their ranch, their children called everyone inside for dinner. Wade and Penelope stood slowly, their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work but their spirits still vital and engaged. They walked hand in hand into their home, surrounded by the laughter and love of the family they had created together. The town of Globe, Arizona, had once called her cursed, but Wade Rivers had called her beautiful, and in doing so, he had proved them all wrong. They had built a love story for the ages, one that would be passed down through their family for generations, a testament to the power of seeing someone truly and loving them completely. In the end, that was the greatest magic of all, not the breaking of a curse, but the building of a life. Not the defeat of superstition, but the triumph of faith in each other. Not the erasure of the past, but the courage to face the future together. Penelope and Wade Rivers lived out their days in happiness, surrounded by children and grandchildren who never knew a time when their family was anything but blessed. They grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year, each shared sunset, each quiet moment on the porch where it had all begun. When Wade finally passed away at the age of 79, Penelope was holding his hand. His last words were, "Still the most beautiful woman I ever saw," and he died with a smile on his face. Penelope mourned him deeply, but without the desperate grief that had marked her earlier losses. She had had 46 years with Wade Rivers, years filled with love and laughter and purpose. He had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams, and she would be forever grateful. She lived another 5 years after his passing, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still taking on the occasional sewing project and telling stories about the old days. She spoke often about the cowboy who had ridden into Globe and changed everything, who had seen past superstition to the woman beneath. On a warm spring evening, much like the one when Wade had proposed all those decades ago, Penelope Richardson Rivers passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her children buried her next to Wade on the hill overlooking the town, where they could watch the sunsets together for eternity. The story of the cursed widow and the cowboy who loved her became legend in Globe. Parents told it to their children as an example of how love conquers fear, how courage changes everything, how one person standing up for what's right can transform an entire community. The tale was embellished and romanticized over the years, but at its core remained the truth, that Penelope Richardson had come to Globe broken by loss, and Wade Rivers had helped her become whole again. Their descendants continued to thrive in Arizona, carrying forward the values of courage, compassion, and unwavering love that Penelope and Wade had instilled in them. The Double R Ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what could be built when two people chose each other and refused to let the world tell them their love was wrong. And if, on certain evenings when the light was just right, someone claimed to see two figures on the hill overlooking Globe, holding hands and watching the sunset together, well, That was just proof that some love stories never really end. They simply transform, becoming part of the landscape, part of the history, part of the magic that makes a place more than just a town on a map. Penelope Richardson had arrived in Globe cursed and alone. She left it blessed and beloved, having lived a life full of love, purpose, and joy. Wade Rivers had promised her he would prove the town wrong about her curse, and he had kept that promise every single day for the rest of his life. In the end, the greatest curse is believing you don't deserve love. And the greatest blessing is finding someone who sees through the lies to the truth of who you really are. Penelope and Wade had given each other that blessing, and in doing so, they had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Their story became a reminder that love is always worth fighting for, that courage can change destiny, and that sometimes the best thing we can do is call someone beautiful when the world insists they are cursed. Because words have power and love has magic, and together they can rewrite any story into one with a happy ending. The town called her cursed. The cowboy called her beautiful. And he proved them all wrong, one day, one kiss, one sunset at a time, until the curse was just a memory and the beauty was all that remained.